William and Ina Campbell, an elderly couple in their 80s, resided on Jackson Road in Clarksville, Tennessee, sharing a loving relationship. During a severe snowstorm in 2010, their mailbox was accidentally hit by a neighbor navigating the treacherous roads. The neighbor attempted to contact William Campbell via phone, but he remained unreachable. Consequently, the neighbor reached out to Daniel Champagne, a nearby resident and close acquaintance of the Campbells, who was regarded by the couple as a surrogate son and entrusted with a spare key to their residence. Daniel endeavored to establish contact with the couple, but received no response, prompting him to utilize the spare key to enter their home and ensure their well-being. Upon entering, he was met with a distressing scene. William and Ina Campbell lay lifeless on their beds, having been murdered while asleep. As the Campbells grew older, they faced various health challenges that required them to sleep in separate beds. When Daniel discovered Ina's lifeless body, her oxygen tube was still attached to her nose, a poignant detail that underscored the tragedy. As the initial shock wore off and reality set in, Daniel took stock of his surroundings, noticing that the drawers had been rummaged through and the kitchen cupboards were left ajar, indicating a thorough ransacking of the premises. What struck him as particularly odd was that none of the Campbells' firearms had been taken, a circumstance that defied the typical pattern of robbery, according to Clarksville Police Detective Tim Anderson, who noted that guns are usually the most coveted items in such incidents. Daniel promptly notified the authorities, who arrived swiftly and initiated a thorough examination of the evidence. In the course of their investigation, some neighbors were questioned, and they reported that the Campbells' dogs had remained eerily silent, a departure from their usual behavior of barking when strangers entered the home unannounced. The fact that the dogs had not barked led officers to infer that the perpetrator was likely someone familiar to the victims and their pets. Investigators found it peculiar that no valuables had been taken, with jewelry boxes remaining untouched and the safe left unopened. Additionally, the money that was lying around the house was still present when the police arrived. These circumstances suggested that the motive behind the crime was not solely financial gain. Instead, the perpetrator may have had ulterior motives, seeking to benefit in a more substantial way. As a result, William Roger Campbell, the adopted son of the victims, became a person of interest in the investigation. As the next in line to inherit their estate, he stood to gain a significant amount, with William Campbell's estate valued at $130,000 and Ina's estate worth approximately $120,000. The investigators' minds lingered on Roger's suspicious behavior, recalling how he had refused to fully cooperate, weaving a web of deceit with his inconsistent statements. The fact that he was the last known person to see his parents alive only added to the sinister aura surrounding him. Yet, at the time, the evidence fell short of definitively linking him to the crime scene. As the years went by, the leads grew cold, and the case seemed to fade into obscurity. But in a stunning turn of events, on June 21st, 2021, Roger Campbell's world was shattered when deputies from the Loudest County Sheriff's Office arrived at his doorstep, extraditing him to Clarksville. The bond was set at a hefty $500,000, and he was charged with the heinous murder of his adoptive parents. Roger proclaimed his innocence, pleading not guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, but his words rang hollow. Unbeknownst to him, detectives had been tirelessly gathering evidence, meticulously building a formidable case against him, one that would ultimately seal his fate. The trial of Roger Campbell commenced in January 2023, marking the beginning of the end for his claims of innocence. Prosecutors unleashed a damning array of evidence, meticulously gathered by detectives over the years, which relentlessly eroded Roger's chances of acquittal. A chilling revelation came to light. Just days after the gruesome discovery of the Campbells' remains, law enforcement had paid Roger a visit in Georgia, where they found a sinister, red-stained sheepskin hidden in his truck, its origin and significance shrouded in mystery. Although testing couldn't confirm whether it was blood, the discovery of Roger's blood on a dish soap bottle near the kitchen sink and in the upstairs bathroom sink drain seemed to whisper tales of a dark and troubled past. The testimony of Roger's ex-wife and son served as the final nails in his coffin, with William Sean Campbell, Roger's 35-year-old son, poignantly recalling his close bond with his late grandparents, whose memories now seemed tainted by the sinister actions of their own flesh and blood. Linda Campbell, Roger's 70-year-old ex-wife, took the stand, her words dripping with a mix of sadness and accusation. She recounted the fateful day, just 3 days before the Campbells' lifeless bodies were discovered, when she encountered Roger at the commissary, accompanied by his unsuspecting mother, Ina Campbell. The memory seemed to hang in the air like a specter, foreshadowing the horrors that were to come. Detectives, meanwhile, had been painstakingly examining the crime scene, unearthing 2.25 caliber shell casings in the victim's room, linked to a single sinister firearm. The discovery of a box of ammunition belonging to the late William Campbell seemed to whisper tales of a calculated and ruthless execution. Andrew Smith, the owner of It's Time Clock Shop, testified about the Campbells' prized possession, a rare Lenskirch grandfather clock. Smith's annual visits to maintain the clock had made him familiar with the family's treasures, and he revealed that he had offered Roger $5,000 for the clock, a sum that now seemed tainted by the suspicion of foul play. In a cruel twist of fate, Roger's attempt to sell the prized Lenskirch grandfather clock was initially rebuffed by his father, William, who recognized the timepiece's true value. However, in the days following the brutal murders, Smith received a mysterious phone call inquiring if he was still interested in purchasing the clock. Eagerly, he agreed and was directed to the Campbells' household, where he was met with a ghastly surprise. Instead of the familiar faces of his patrons, it was Roger, the adopted son, who greeted him with an unsettling nervousness. When Smith inquired about his parents, Roger's response was laced with a chilling nonchalance. "Didn't you hear? Mom and Dad were shot and killed in the bedrooms." Smith's instincts screamed at him to abandon the sale, but Roger's unsettling reassurances, "I'm their only heir, I can do whatever I want with their belongings," only added to the sense of macabre, leaving Smith to wonder if he was witnessing a grotesque display of filial piety or something far more sinister. Smith's unease was momentarily assuaged, and he proceeded with the transaction, but the experience left him with a lasting sense of disquiet. What struck him as particularly odd was Roger's eerie composure in the face of his parents' gruesome murders, as he haggled over the price of the clock with a calculating detachment. Roger's attempt to inflate the price to $6,000, despite his parents' freshly minted corpses, seemed a grotesque display of greed. Ultimately, he settled for the original $5,000. Moreover, Roger's previous testimony came back to haunt him like a specter, as detectives revealed a damning discrepancy. He claimed to have left his parents' home at 7 a.m. on January 28, 2010, but forensic experts determined that the time of death was approximately 6:20 a.m., a chilling gap that implicated Roger in the murders. Prosecutors seized upon this evidence, painting Roger as a man consumed by an insatiable greed, willing to sacrifice even his own flesh and blood for a fleeting financial gain. The prosecution laid bare the stark reality of Roger's motives, exposing a heart of stone that beat only for financial gain. "They weren't dying fast enough," Assistant District Attorney Crystal Morgan declared, her words dripping with disdain. "He needed money, and they were taking too long to die." The chilling calculation of Roger's actions was finally brought to light, and on January 23, 2023, the 66-year-old was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. In a world where hatred and greed lurk in the shadows, justice can still be served thanks to the relentless pursuit of truth through modern technologies and innovative investigation methods. Yet, the darkness that drove Roger to commit such heinous crimes serves as a haunting reminder that evil exists, and only through unwavering determination and kindness can we hope to vanquish it.
On January 7, 1969, at approximately 12 p.m., Jim Humphreys, a 27-year-old Harvard Ph.D. candidate, emerged from an examination room at Cambridge's Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology, having completed his general exams. This milestone marked the culmination of years of effort for Jim and his fellow archaeology students, signaling the transition from classroom studies to full-time dissertation work. However, Jim's accomplishment was overshadowed by growing concern for his 23-year-old girlfriend, Jane Britton, also an archaeology Ph.D. student at Harvard. Jane was scheduled to take her general exams at the Peabody Museum that morning, but had unexpectedly failed to appear, alarming Jim and their classmates. As soon as Jim finished his exam that afternoon, he embarked on the brief 15-minute walk from the museum to Jane's apartment building on University Road, his mind increasingly preoccupied with worry. Jane's uncharacteristic absence from her general exams, coupled with Jim's unsuccessful morning phone calls, deepened his concern. As he walked to her apartment, he attempted to rationalize her disappearance, considering possibilities like illness or oversleeping. However, knowing Jane's exceptional academic dedication and responsibility, these explanations seemed unlikely. Given their recent conversations, Jim was convinced Jane hadn't simply forgotten or intentionally skipped the exams. Just the night before, she had expressed nervousness about the upcoming tests, indicating her clear intention to attend. Her plans and mindset had been evident when they'd gone out with friends from their program, enjoyed dinner, and ice skated at Cambridge Common. After returning to Jane's apartment around 10:30 p.m., Jim had departed about an hour later. Now, almost 13 hours to the minute since his departure, Jim arrived at 6 University Road, hastening to her 4th-floor apartment. He knocked on the door, his anxiety growing with each passing moment. Jim's knocks went unanswered, but they caught the attention of Jane's friends and next-door neighbors, Don and Jill Mitchell. Don stepped into the hallway, expecting to see Jane, but instead found Jim, whose worried expression conveyed his concern. Jim shared his reason for visiting: Jane's unexplained absence from her morning exam. Don, having seen Jane just hours earlier, shared Jim's unease. He urged Jim to enter the apartment, noting that the door was usually left unlocked. After a second knock yielded no response, Jim turned the handle, finding the door open. Upon entering, Jim was met with an unusual chill, noticing that one of the kitchen windows was open, a change from when he had last been there. The rest of the apartment seemed unchanged, but his gaze fell upon Jane's bedroom, where an unsettling scene unfolded. Jane lay face down on her bed, her nightgown pulled above her waist. Jim's growing unease turned to alarm as he took in this disturbing sight, his mind racing with concern for Jane's well-being. Rather than attempting to rouse Jane, Jim promptly exited the apartment and sought Don Mitchell's assistance, requesting that his wife, Jill, intervene due to Jane's state of undress. Jim thought it wise for Jill to approach Jane first. Jill agreed and entered the room, but swiftly returned, visibly shaken and feeling unwell. With growing alarm, Don entered the room next. Upon closer inspection, he discovered Jane wasn't merely lying face down. Her head was obscured by a pile consisting of a sheepskin rug and a fur coat. Don's horror intensified as he pulled back the coat, revealing the gruesome reality. Jane was dead. The police soon arrived at the crime scene and initiated a thorough search of Jane's apartment. Their investigation revealed a striking absence of disarray. None of Jane's valuables, jewelry, or money had been taken. Her pet turtle and cat remained unharmed inside the apartment. According to friends, family, and Jim, Jane's room retained its characteristic clutter, with one stark exception: the rug and fur coat covering her head, concealing the severe injuries that had claimed her life. The lack of disturbance and targeted violence suggested a calculated personal attack, leaving investigators to unravel the mystery surrounding Jane's tragic demise. The autopsy results would soon confirm the severity of Jane's injuries, revealing she had succumbed to blunt force trauma, likely inflicted by a sharp-edged or pointed instrument. The fatal blows had caused significant contusions and lacerations to her head, with at least one strike forceful enough to fracture her skull. Although the murder weapon remained elusive, investigators initially suspected that a hatchet or small pick hammer might have been used. The crime scene analysis revealed blood splatters throughout Jane's room, primarily confined to her bed. This, coupled with the absence of signs of struggle and no reported unusual noises, led investigators to believe Jane was attacked while asleep. Furthermore, evidence indicated Jane had been sexually assaulted, although authorities initially declined to publicly confirm this aspect of the investigation. To establish a precise timeline surrounding the murder, investigators began by questioning Jim Humphries, Don Mitchell, and Jill Mitchell. Jim recounted his date with Jane the previous night, detailing their return to her apartment around 10:30 p.m. and his departure approximately an hour later, during which everything seemed normal. The Mitchells provided additional context, sharing that Jane had visited their apartment next door shortly after Jim's departure. The trio had shared a drink together until around 12:30 a.m., at which point Jane presumably retired to her apartment to rest before her upcoming exams that morning. Following the initial statements, detectives deduced that Jane's murder occurred approximately 10 to 12 hours before the discovery of her body. To further investigate, authorities expanded their inquiry to include other residents of the apartment building and nearby individuals. 2 additional witnesses came forward with potentially relevant information. The first was the 7-year-old daughter of the building's superintendent, who reported hearing unusual noises on the fire escape around 9 p.m. the previous night. Notably, this fire escape originated in the courtyard and provided direct access to Jane's apartment through the kitchen window, the same window Jim had found open earlier. Another witness, identified as either a local transit worker or another apartment building resident, depending on the source, described seeing a man fleeing the building around 1:30 a.m. on the morning of Jane's murder. The suspect was estimated to be around 6 feet tall and weigh approximately 170 pounds. These witness accounts provided crucial leads for investigators, offering potential insights into the events surrounding Jane's tragic death. Members of the investigative team considered the possibility that the 2 witnesses might have encountered the perpetrator, but consensus on the relevance of their statements proved elusive. Regarding the first witness, uncertainty arose due to the 9 p.m. timeline, preceding both the murder and Jane's return with Jim. Investigative questions lingered. If the perpetrator had entered at 9 p.m., why hadn't Jim and Jane noticed anything unusual upon their arrival? Additionally, Don Mitchell reported being in Jane's apartment during this time frame, as he occasionally accessed her larger fridge to retrieve items. He observed nothing out of the ordinary. The significance of the open kitchen window also remained unclear. With Jane's bedroom window similarly open, investigators considered the building's notorious poor heating control, which led residents to often leave windows open, even in winter, to mitigate the sweltering temperatures. These inconsistencies and contextual factors hindered the team's ability to draw definitive conclusions from the witness statements, leaving the investigation with unresolved questions and ambiguity. The investigation into Jane's murder was highly publicized due to her family's connections to academia. Her father, J. Boyd Britton, held a prominent position as Vice President of Administration at Radcliffe College, one of the prestigious Seven Sisters colleges affiliated with Harvard. This institution was established to provide women with educational opportunities equivalent to those offered by the traditionally male Ivy League schools. The high-profile nature of the case, combined with the shocking brutality of the crime, drew widespread media attention. Reporters swarmed the apartment building, and news of the murder spread rapidly across the country, even eclipsing coverage of Sirhan's trial for the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. Interestingly, Jane's family background isn't the only notable aspect of this case. The investigation itself presents some intriguing complexities. For instance, the second witness statement seemed to align closely with the estimated time of the murder, but it lacked any concrete evidence linking it to the crime. The witness described seeing a person running from the building around 1:30 a.m., but it was raining that night, making it plausible that the individual was simply seeking shelter. The public's outrage and demand for answers were fueled by the poignant details of Jane's life and the senseless brutality of her murder. Jane's promising academic trajectory had been abruptly cut short. As one of the select few to transition directly from Radcliffe College to Harvard's PhD program, her future held immense potential. Her participation in a prestigious archaeological expedition to Iran the previous summer, searching for Alexander the Great's lost citadel of Carmania, underscored her exceptional talent and dedication. The shocking contrast between Jane's bright prospects and her tragic fate resonated deeply, especially given the crime's proximity to Harvard, an institution synonymous with excellence. As the investigation unfolded, scrutiny shifted toward Harvard itself, with reports highlighting alarming security lapses at Jane's apartment building. Despite the university's ownership since 1967, the building had long been in disrepair, with residents' safety concerns allegedly disregarded. Disturbing revelations emerged. Locks were either broken or missing at nearly all 5 entrances, effectively granting unrestricted access to anyone. This negligence sparked widespread indignation, with many questioning how such a prestigious institution could fail to ensure the basic safety of its students. The case's disturbing details and Harvard's perceived responsibility ignited a firestorm of public concern, intensifying pressure on investigators to bring Jane's killer to justice. Allegations of inadequate security within the building compounded concerns, as numerous tenants reported that door locks were often temperamental, broken, or ineffective, leading many to abandon their use altogether. Jane's apartment was no exception. She had endured a non-functional lock throughout her residency at 6 University Road. Similarly, many windows in the building were vulnerable, as evidenced by a neighbor's ability to open a window from the outside fire escape to release a trapped cat, as recounted in a Boston Globe article. The security criticisms gained urgency due to a disturbing precedent. Jane Britton was not the first young woman to meet a tragic end within the building. In 1963, graduate student Beverly Salmons was fatally stabbed in an apartment just 2 floors below Jane's. Although Albert DeSalvo, notorious as the Boston Strangler, had confessed to the crime, many remained skeptical of his involvement. The similarity between the 2 murders sparked speculation about potential links between the cases, raising unsettling questions about the building's safety and the possibility of a serial offender. With Jane's murder reviving memories of the earlier tragedy, the pressure to re-examine the investigations and ensure accountability intensified, casting a shadow over Harvard's reputation and demanding justice for the victims. In an effort to alleviate public concerns, law enforcement officials announced that they had found no evidence linking Jane Britton's murder to Beverly Salmons' 1963 killing. They reaffirmed their conviction that Salmons was a victim of the Boston Strangler, Albert DeSalvo, who was already incarcerated when Jane was killed, thereby precluding any connection between the 2 cases. Simultaneously, investigators shared preliminary findings from their inquiry into Jane's murder. Initially, they reported the disappearance of a sharp-edged stone belonging to Jane, speculating it might be the murder weapon. However, this lead was later resolved when the stone was located. Detectives also disclosed that 4 individuals, including Jim Humphreys and the Mitchell couple, had agreed to take lie detector tests. This was characterized as a procedural formality, as authorities did not suspect these individuals of involvement. Most notably, investigators revealed the discovery of unidentified fingerprints at the crime scene. After ruling out matches from Jane's friends and family, speculation arose that these prints might belong to the perpetrator. Despite these revelations, the investigation had yet to yield substantial suspects, and as time passed, leads began to dwindle, leaving law enforcement facing a challenging and frustrating stalemate in the case. Due to the investigation's stagnation, authorities meticulously scrutinized Jane's personal telephone book to identify and interviewed contacts. They even deployed cameras at her funeral to capture potential suspects exhibiting suspicious behavior. Initially, police were unusually candid about the investigation's lack of progress, acknowledging their frustration with the absence of a clear motive. A detective publicly expressed, "If we had some kind of handle on this case, we might make progress." However, this transparency abruptly ceased when media outlets began reporting on a peculiar alleged clue discovered at the crime scene: red ochre, a naturally occurring reddish-brown powder with ancient origins, commonly used as a pigment in painting and decoration. The substance was found in multiple areas of Jane's room, including near her body. While its presence could be attributed to Jane's avid painting hobby, speculation escalated when a professor highlighted an alternative use for red ochre. Many cultures used the powder to purify the deceased for the afterlife. This ritualistic connotation sparked speculation that Jane's killer might have intentionally sprinkled the powder, suggesting a potential connection to Jane, particularly given its familiarity within anthropology and archaeology circles. Cambridge Police Chief James Reagan, vexed by the swirling rumors, imposed a news blackout on the Jane Britton investigation, restricting statements to the press unless explicitly authorized by his office. For several weeks, media outlets relied on recycled details and scarce official updates as police continued struggling to unearth new evidence. However, the relative quiet was short-lived. In early February, a chilling parallel emerged with the report of a second brutal murder in Cambridge. Ada Bean, a 50-year-old widow living less than a mile from Jane's residence, fell victim to an eerily similar crime. The unsettling similarities between the Jane Britton and Ada Bean cases reignited public anxiety, raising questions about potential links and the possibility of a serial offender. The murder of Ada Bean, a 50-year-old widow, revealed unsettling parallels with the Jane Britton case. Both victims lived alone in multi-story apartment buildings with compromised security. Ada's building had unlocked entrances, allowing unrestricted access. The crime scene similarities were striking. Ada, like Jane, had been bludgeoned in the head, found on her bed, and apparently attacked while sleeping. Her nightgown was pulled up, and a blanket covered her head. Although the public and media swiftly linked the two cases, authorities remained cautious, acknowledging similarities but lacking conclusive evidence to establish a definitive connection. As attention shifted to Ada's murder, a grand jury convened to examine evidence in the Jane Britton case. Investigators hoped the proceedings would clarify their findings, potentially uncovering new information through witness statements. However, these expectations proved unrealistic. The grand jury proceedings ultimately fizzled out, failing to yield significant breakthroughs or identify a suspect. Without a conclusive outcome, the Jane Britton case gradually receded from public attention, its captivating hold on the community slowly dissipating. Despite the official open status of Jane Britton's murder investigation, progress stagnated for decades. The Cambridge police eventually handed over case files to the Massachusetts State Police. Periodically, new investigators revisited the case, hoping fresh perspectives or technological advancements would yield breakthroughs. In the 1990s, two detectives discovered a promising lead. Preserved semen, believed to belong to the perpetrator, had been collected during the initial investigation, predating forensic DNA use. Although the sample was small, its existence offered hope. DNA testing against the Federal Combined DNA Index System database failed to produce a match in the initial and 2006 retests. Many investigators concluded the case was destined to remain unsolved. However, unbeknownst to them, they were closer to solving the case than ever before. It would take external pressure to ultimately crack the investigation. In the mid-2010s, multiple individuals independently requested the Middlesex District Attorney's Office to release Jane Britton's case records to the public. United by a shared passion for solving the case, these individuals included Becky Cooper, a former The New Yorker staff writer who first learned about Jane's story during her Harvard undergraduate days in 2009. By 2016, Cooper had made it her mission to help solve the case. Michael Widmer, a former journalist, had an even more personal connection. In 1969, as a United Press International reporter, Widmer covered Jane's murder as his first assignment, just 2 days into his job. He wrote one of the initial news stories about the case. It wasn't until 2015, when Michael Widmer retired from the Massachusetts Taxpayers Association, that he was able to dedicate time to re-examining the case. Widmer, along with others like Becky Cooper, believed that making the case records public could be the key to solving the murder. However, the Middlesex District Attorney's Office refused to release the documents, citing concerns that it could jeopardize a potential conviction. Frustratingly, the little information that was released consisted of newspaper clippings already in the public domain. What's more, Widmer himself had written some of those articles, making the secrecy even more absurd. According to Widmer, some information shared with journalists in 1969 was even withheld later on. This led Widmer, Cooper, and others to take drastic measures and file lawsuits against the District Attorney's Office. The battle for transparency was chronicled by Boston Globe writer Todd Wallach, who highlighted the resistance from Middlesex District Attorney Marian Ryan. Despite the challenges, the persistence of Widmer, Cooper, and others ultimately paved the way for a breakthrough in the case. Despite initial resistance from the Middlesex District Attorney's Office, citing concerns that releasing records could jeopardize the case, journalists like Becky Cooper and Michael Widmer fought for transparency. Their efforts ultimately contributed to the solving of the case, even though they didn't win their legal battle. In November 2018, DNA evidence finally yielded a match to a suspect, Michael Sumter, a convicted serial rapist who had died in 2001. Interestingly, Sumter had already been linked to 2 other murders in Boston, the 1972 murder of Ellen Rutchick and the 1973 murder of Mary Lee McLean. What's more, Sumter had ties to Cambridge, having lived there as a child and worked less than a mile from Jane's apartment at the time of her murder. This case highlights the importance of transparency in government and law enforcement. As Todd Wallach pointed out, releasing records has produced significant new leads in other cold cases across the country and is standard practice in many states outside of Massachusetts. The concerns about jeopardizing the case seem less valid, especially after nearly 50 years. It's worth noting that Massachusetts has a significant number of unsolved murders, with around 3,749 cold cases as of 2024. While law enforcement makes every effort to solve these cases, breakthroughs in DNA technology have been instrumental in cracking many of them. Following the identification of Michael Sumter as Jane Britton's killer, District Attorney Marian Ryan outlined the office's theory. Sumter stalked and followed Jane home on the night of the murder. He waited for her boyfriend Jim to leave before using the fire escape to enter Jane's apartment and assault her. The witness's description of a man fleeing the building around 1:30 a.m. likely matched Sumter's height, weight, and appearance. Notably, the red ochre powder, which fueled sensationalism in 1969, was deemed insignificant to the investigation. The 2018 DNA match was made possible by advancements in DNA technology and testing methods. Although Sumter's DNA was on file in the Combined DNA Index System database since his 2001 death, earlier tests failed to yield a match. Improved forensic techniques enabled re-examination of the evidence, ultimately linking Sumter to Jane's murder. Recent advancements in DNA technology have significantly enhanced forensic capabilities. Notably, the DNA tests linking Michael Sumter to 2 other murder cases occurred in 2010 and 2012, years after the 2006 test in the Jane Britton case. Retesting the DNA in Jane's case sooner prompted by requests from Cooper and Widmer, might have solved the case years earlier. Their pressure ensured the investigation remained active. Jane Britton's case remains the oldest solved case in Middlesex County. While her loved ones have found closure after 5 decades, some questions persist. Most notably, authorities haven't linked Sumter to the murder of Ada Bean, despite similarities between the crimes. Ada's case remains unsolved. The hope remains that Ada Bean's case will also be solved, bringing closure to her family and friends.